Hey, that's pretty good. The Raptors defeat the Sacramento Kings 112 to 99 in their first preseason game of the short preseason. These things are pretty short because they're trying to maximize the players' rest and stuff for the regular season. I guess we'll see how that goes. But yeah, in Vancouver, they win a game. I think if you were looking forward to the Raptors this year and you're saying, I expect X and Y to be good, a lot of what you would say is a lot of what we've been looking forward to in past seasons, which is defense and transition. And boy, oh boy, man, they really, really had it going. Scotty Barnes is one of the first places you could start. The Raptors last year, they played the Kings extremely well. I did a video breaking down their defense about it, but when you shrink the court and you have a lot of length everywhere, you can do a really good job of complicating, in particular, dribble handoff actions. Guards can get stuck on a lot of the switches. Big men can kind of be lumbering through it. But if you have a lot of wings to move through these defensive actions, you can shut down a lot of it and just completely negate that downhill. And if you want to switch it, you have like size guys to switch. All this said, the Raptors are working in a few different players like Dennis Schroeder. They are putting Jakob Poeltl in a position that he wasn't in last season guarding the Kings. And they did like a fantastic job of it. Now, on the offensive side of the court, we still have to see a bunch of stuff happen as far as what the Raptors are going to do when they're running through the high post, because that wasn't super successful. The initial actions that the Raptors ran offensively were very, very similar to what we saw under Nick Nurse. The thing that did change, and this, caveats apply, this was a regular season game. The Raptors won their first regular season game, or sorry, preseason game last season, 114 to 81 or 82. Like preseason is preseason for a reason. But the big thing here is that Darko at Media Day talked about carrying the advantage and making the defense guard you a couple times during a possession. That doesn't happen if you flatten out into isolation immediately after the first action doesn't work. The great thing is, the Raptors actually paid attention to this offensive tenet in this game and were much quicker moving off of the ball once the first primary action didn't work. They didn't have that much going on initially, but they moved on to other stuff. There's a play that comes to mind, right? Like they have a double drag that doesn't go well. I think it was Dennis Schroeder on ball. They eventually just switch into quickly depending on what you want to call it, it could be a twirl DHO out of the gut of the defense, right? And then Pascal curls, this was second half play, gets downhill for a layup. That's like a great little play that keeps the rest of the defense on edge as you move through the action. They had a bunch of stuff where they're working with Schroeder, and Schroeder, who is exceptional at turning the corner. When you're running those Chicago actions up top, particularly the angled ones, and he's coming around the screen, which is disguised, he's going to be able to turn the corner, get to the foul line, do all that kind of stuff. I see people talking about Scotty. Scotty was fantastic, and it's super important for Scotty to be able to play in transition. It's super important for Scotty to, at times, flatten out into isolation. He's a big dude who is brutish and just bullies guys. If he has a mismatch on him, like Malik Monk or something, let him go to work. Let him do his thing. Guess what? We saw a little bit of that early on, and we saw a lot, like a lot of the Raptors getting out and running. When we talk about this Kings team, they are Sabonis, Javon McGee, plus guards, basically. Sure, they have Keegan Murray. Sure, they have Harrison Barnes, but they are dominated largely with guard play and running off of Sabonis. When the Raptors push, everybody, you're paying attention close at the start of the game. Scotty has that hit ahead pass, and OG has the early seal on somebody, and he gets fouled, and the shot goes up. And it's like, this is just great, easy offense. You don't even have to run anything. Scotty is fantastic at hit aheads. Pascal is fantastic at hit aheads. And all of OG, Pascal, and Scotty are great at creating early seals. You can beat the defense down the floor, do it. And that can, there's like a multivariate approach to that, right? You can beat guards down the floor or take them with you, get them sealed early in the post, easy peasy. That's what OG did. What Chris Boucher did, and when they played the Jazz in their first preseason game last season, he was their leader in points and rebounds in that game too. These open flow games are really good for a guy who's fast and long and willing to cut and run like Boucher is. That's fantastic because we see him in these open concepts just darting to the rim. he can beat almost every big man down the floor. So can Scotty, so can Pascal, so can OG. So, especially with these Kings, there's a huge opportunity for these guys to, attack from the wing while using their size, or attack from the wing while using their quickness relative to the bigs and the guards on the other roster. I think it was a nice game to watch. I enjoyed it a bunch. The defense, man, I think it's great to watch the Raptors. Anytime I've been talking about this team, what are you going to focus on most importantly? I have been doing the outside looking in series, and guess what? You talk to people, what are you looking forward to from the Raptors? And people from all over, mostly you're talking to people from other markets who cover other teams. They're from America. They say the defense. The defense looked great. And against one of the best, Sacramento was no slouch offensively last year. I think everybody understands that. And the Raptors, despite having really good defensive performances against them without Pirtle, I think it was just as strong with Pirtle, with a little bit less switching. They talked about it on the broadcast. It's a little bit less in the passing lanes, even though Gary and OG, I think they were still pretty aggressive. As far as Pascal, let's talk Pascal. The second half, I think, was very encouraging. There was that one play I'm sure people will remember where he was sticking Malik Monk in isolation, shifting with him, matching speeds, playing that mirror defense that he's capable of. He's got really special feet for a guy his size. He's really quick and nimble for a guy his size. More well equipped to guard guards, like we saw in the playoffs against John Wall, like we saw against MVP Russell Westbrook. Pascal has been their primary in games before. We saw a little bit of that in this game. We also saw pretty bad defensive minutes. Pretty lazy, got back cut, not really paying attention, contests a shot, doesn't pay attention to Harrison Barnes cutting, following his miss. Like that kind of stuff, not good. There's this interesting thing happening, basically. Pascal Siakam, there's a couple comments, right? Grange reports it. He's not getting the extension until the team sees him fit into Darko's overall scheme. Great, sure. I asked Masai about that specifically on Media Day. He reiterates that point. Now, it's not reporting from a source, it's Masai on camera saying it. Usually, the guys, the veterans, don't play that hard during the preseason. Usually, they don't have that much going on. They're kind of just going through the motions, which it seemed like Pascal did. But when the team itself is, running through this like rebrand thing, and you're talking about we have to see X and Y, and fans, rightfully so, tune into this preseason game. You have Darko, the team is doing a great job of marketing their alleged style of basketball, right? By having him explain his ideas of point 0.5 offense on screen during the commercial or right at the back end of a commercial break saying like, "Hey, this is what we're trying to do. These are our offensive tenets." That's like a really good job as far as the team, as far as trying to communicate to fans, like what you might expect, what we're trying to do. And it's just kind of odd to have that juxtaposed against Pascal. It's like, we got to see you do it, but also you're a veteran, and veterans typically preseason isn't so much for you except to kind of like go through the motions. As far as that goes, they had a couple wins for him off ball. He's not Scotty in transition, because Scotty is by year 5 or year 6 or something. We might think that he's the best transition player in basketball. Like that's a possibility. I don't know overall basketball where he'll rank. I think he'll be an all-star by that point, but transition, he's got to be top 3 at that point. And right now, he's very, very good. Pascal is also very good. He killed in transition. Even Thaddeus Young killed in transition. This team did such a good job of beating the Kings down the floor and sealing early. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but it was a hell of a thing. Yeah, I have to learn how to do this properly to do the live version of the reaction podcast. So I'm going to take a break right now. I'm going to read some of what I'm being told live, which is different than I usually do it. So let's talk about Malachi Flynn, because I see some things here. Flynn, mind you, you guys are also probably using the chat as a means to talk with each other. So feel free. Flynn was rough. He had a lot of possessions. He had a lot of opportunities to get downhill. He had a ton of screen usage. I didn't think he did a very good job of getting downhill when it was available. And I didn't think he did a very good job of, when downhill wasn't there, getting wide to create larger passing avenues, right? That's a big thing in the pick and roll is like if you can get downhill, like we saw Schroeder do, make sure you use that first step, put pressure on the big, make sure they can't square up, make them flip those hips and make them guard you, beat them to the glass so they can't goaltend, right? Like, or so it gets called a goaltend, you get the layup off. That's Schroeder really good. What Schroeder struggled with in this game was getting wide, playing his roll man into space, or seeing the skip pass. A couple turnovers out of that, right? So, it's kind of tough to keep up with. The tough thing with Malachi was that yeah, Giannis will probably be the best transition player. I said top 3, right? I said I was protecting myself against the Giannis thing. For audio listeners, somebody said Giannis will be the best transition player. That's probably correct. But to get back to Flynn, the big thing is that he wasn't able to turn the corner or get wide. And I think he did like a really good job of moving through the offense, not getting stuck a bunch. That's something that the Raptors as a whole, I was super impressed with. Those are the things that lead to Jalen McDaniels being able to slip to the front of the rim for like a floater. If you're standing around stagnant, and we saw when the Raptors tried to run through the high post early and they're running those split actions, they're not getting anything out of those plays, really. The Kings are just going under everything because, it's like high post offense. The best example of it is the Warriors, right? They run a ton of high post stuff, a ton of split action with Draymond, but that's coupled with really excellent perimeter shooting, like Gary, like Curry, like Clay, for example, Jordan Poole, who's gone now. When you run the split action, the tension for the defense is like there's going to be a guy popping up who will come off that screen too into space, and you're going to have a 2-on-1 above the break. And a 2-on-1 above the break is not dangerous unless you have a good shooter. So the Raptors had trouble with that high post stuff, with the split action, trying to get the Kings to bite because the Kings, for the most part, were comfortable with that 2-on-1 action. When we saw Scotty come off of the split action, he created an advantage, not because of the action, but because he settled into an isolation, did a half spin, brought it back, got into the paint, got fouled. I mean, you got to let the big dog eat sometimes. That's going to happen for Pascal as well. This is a team that is trying to play fast, but can't be afraid that, you know what? If it is mismatch hunting at time, it's going to be mismatch hunting at times. Pascal and Scotty are both, and especially Scotty, if he's making a jump in anything, you want to see him make a jump in his scoring this season. I wrote that piece where I looked at every single pass he threw last season. Maybe not by assists, but by passing talent. He's there, man. He's one of the best passers in the world. You can call me a homer if you'd like. I watch a lot of basketball. I make sure I go watch all the film a few times. I try to write these scouting style pieces that could fit into a front office or a scouting department. And I just got to say, you don't see many guys make the multitude of reads that Scotty does and that they have the passing talent to realize what their brain is telling them to do. Like you can be on the court playing pickup, right? And you see the pass. Sometimes your body can't get the ball there fast enough or with enough arc or with less arc or whatever it is. You can't hit the guy in the hand. It's the quarterback throwing that deep pass, right? Scotty can do it all. He sees it all and can do it all. I'm very excited to see what actions they run for him because this game was mostly about really initiating through Jakob when they were being intentional, running out in transition because their defensive core is so strong and they have so many opportunities to push, but also what happens after the initial play. That was the big thing, right? Is that they run their action, nothing's happening with it. Not only are you like, okay, the weak side is really shifting. You can have your guy above the break, your guy below the break. Now they shift. You can, if you want, try and do that just naturally as they glide past each other. Classic weak side stuff. One's lifting, one's diving. Or you can have them set a screen and maybe that creates a bit of tension for a switch that you can hunt later in the clock. Maybe. Or maybe there's a mismatch so that a cut is a little bit more available. That kind of stuff is great. But also on the strong side as well, they're resetting, screening, and they're doing it quickly. The Raptors last season, something that didn't work and that they had a lot of trouble with was guys are really slow to set screens. and guys are also slipping out of every single screen. The like this, I watched every single Scotty pick and roll, right, and wrote that piece on it. He was really, really bad by points per chance, by process, by everything in pick and rolls with Jakob Poeltl. Why? Because if they switch the action, you can't give it to Jakob to just go get you a bucket, really. And because they go under or do push switching on Scotty, and then he's just facing like a straight up isolation, while Jakob's help is also sitting in the paint. Like that's stuff that's tough to navigate. But Jakob does set good screens. Even if guys are going under, if you make Jakob the centerpiece, you're going to make these guys really run through a lot of screens. There's going to be more slips. You make a guy run through 4 screens over 2 plays. Maybe on the 3rd play, he's a little bit slower. Maybe the step isn't as accurate getting around the screen, and Schroeder can turn the corner easier and get to the bucket. Like it's just really good stuff as far as making sure the other defense, as I said at the start of the podcast, Darko said it, making them guard you a couple different times during the possession. And while the Raptors' advantages, they have the same personnel, they're not creating that first really great advantage where they collapse the defense, but they're kind of grinding the defense. And the Kings aren't a good defense for what it's worth, but they're kind of grinding the defense through this repetitive action where you're going to take that bruising. And Thaddeus Young was screening better in this game than he did in a lot of regular season games last year. So was Chris Boucher. So was Pascal. And especially Jakob wasn't better than last year, but he's Jakob and he's a brick wall. We had a question here about a pick and roll. Okay. We have from Phoenix Plazy, Samson, quick question. It's about the inverted pick and roll we ran with Siakam and Fred, which was a really efficient play. You think anyone else on the team can run something similar with Pascal? So, in watching the ghosting, there's plenty of potential for Gary and Scotty to run that ghosted stuff. Scotty was, and it didn't happen enough because teams don't blitz him very often because he's not a shooter, but teams blitz more often when you ghost the screen because there's a lot of friction at the point of attack, right? Scotty is really good at making that like high dribble pickup pass over to the ghoster who's clearing out. That's potential there. Maybe not with Pascal specifically, but Pascal can also do the same thing. It's Gary is the guy who comes in for Fred. He's not as good a screener as Fred was. But Gary is a pretty thick dude. Like he isn't as big as a lot of 2 guards by height, but as far as like he's got the broad shoulders, he's got a bit of weight on him. He could definitely pick up some stuff on screencraft and be more effective in those ghost actions. And I think Gary also, this was something I wrote about last year. He did a great job of using that extra dribble to turn those 18 or 17-foot jumpers into those, 12 feet and under push shots where he shot over 50%. He's made really good steps as far as reading the floor, connecting some of these actions together. The next one is as a playmaker. We see Scotty do it all the time, right? Like Scotty will get that same side cut, that Corey cut, right? And there'll be a guy cutting in from the baseline, and Scotty just never misses that guy. And Scotty's going to get the defense to step up if he has a live dribble coming downhill. And Gary, I think that's a read that he could stand to make better. And that's a read you get a lot of times in ghost actions. And then also there's just tons of potential for whether it's Scotty or Pascal. If you're running ghost action with Gary, a lot of times they'll run it on an empty side. You just come into a wide open half of the court. And then the Raptors, whether it's Boucher or Precious when he gets back, Koloko, whoever is playing off ball, you crash to the glass. And there's also, they can start to run some like pin-ins on the other side too, depending on if guys, manage to run the switch on the ghost screen very well. But anyway, I'm getting bogged down. The Raptors, the defense, pretty great. Okay, another question. Samson, I noticed Barnes was more aggressive, but still seemed to struggle when needing to self-create. Wondering if you feel like the footwork will improve. That's a good question. That was a big thing I noticed when watching. I have a few more pieces coming. I've rewatched all of Scotty's possessions from last season. He isn't able, you can see it, right? When Schroeder gets a screen and he has like that, he really slithery around the corner of the screen, really make sure his guy That's what you learn in basketball, right? A lot of people watching will have played basketball, will have heard a coach say, make sure you get your man and you come off the screen shoulder to shoulder so there's no room for the guy to squeak through. Scotty doesn't get shoulder to shoulder with his screens because he doesn't really get low and he can't get sideways that easily. That's why a lot of his best, most athletic looking drives, one that comes to mind is his against the Minnesota Timberwolves last year, where they switched one and he just from the 45 had a lane. And by the time he dunked the ball, his chest was at the rim, it seemed like. When you start making him slither, he gets a lot slower. And I think like that footwork, I'm not sure how that'll come in the future. Like if maybe he has to get really wide and step outside and then plant going in rather than like going, when you skate, like hockey skating, you go like foot over foot. There's some biomechanics that match as far as like cutting really hard off of screens for snaking or putting guys in jail or just getting downhill quickly at all. That's all like really interesting stuff. Um, TBD on a lot of it. I'm probably talking too much about the biomechanics at this point. People will want a little bit more of the regular stuff. But the defense I thought was great. I mentioned earlier that we're looking at a team that wasn't switching as often when they played the Kings last year, but was still finding a ton of success. The This reminds me of in that 2021-2022 season, the Raptors had a ton of success with these lineups that really didn't include Fred at all. Sometimes they included Gary, but a lot of times we're looking at no guard lineups. And the big numbers out of those lineups were they forced the turnover on like an insane amount of possessions. That length across the floor, it helps shrink the floor for the offense. They never allowed the other team to get offensive rebounds. They did a great job closing out defensive possessions. And they played in transition an insane amount of times. And then the thing that wasn't happening so much in this game, they rebounded about 40% of their own misses. This is something that the Raptors are emulating. They're playing very big. They're a huge basketball team. When Jakob isn't there, I know it's like a little bit smaller. Yes, I do see this as far as someone asking. Your comments are working. Anyway, so they are going to be really big. When you have a lot of length all over the floor, something that you can do is that's why some of the best nail defenders in the NBA, like Jason Tatum, are really huge with big wingspans, is they complicate a lot of skip passes and they complicate a lot of passes one pass away without committing their footwork. They have that length, they have their feet ready, they can jump on something. OG is also one of the best nail defenders in the NBA. These are all things that the Raptors, their length compounds with each other. And so when the Kings are running their offense and they're trying to run through everything, not only is that first thing getting taken away because they're being chased around by Dennis, who is really sticky at the point of attack, or they're being switched. So they go from wing to wing onto a guard because they will be guarding a lot of guards this year with wings. They can just switch across. But the outlet passes, not transition outlet passes, but the outlet passes that the Kings are used to making is like, okay, I feel pressure here. There's going to be a pin in There's going to be a pin in set for the corner. I'm going to lob to the corner. The Raptors really complicate those types of stuff, like your automatics that you've drilled into your team, your Jordy Fernandez, right? You're running through the offense with the Kings, and you're saying like, "Hey, Mike, I'm going to take this. I'm going to teach these guys about our automatic reads." But the Raptors, with their length and their mobility, can change a lot of your automatic reads. We saw a ton of that tonight, and that meant that the Kings, what they had to do, instead of making these passes to kind of switch the play and tilt the floor, a lot of times, instead of using Sabonis as the dribble handoff hub, we see them running from guard to guard to get these handoffs safely, not putting the ball in the air a ton, right? You have to dribble from point A to point B. This is something that the Raptors will be able to do and did tonight. And I know it's preseason, but I actually expect this to be, I think this is something that they'll be able to emulate during the regular season. What this does is it moves teams into the back end of the shot clock. It makes them spend time and use miles on their legs trying to get from point A to point B. And the Raptors do it all while maintaining their shell. And it worked really well with Jakob in there. I know Jakob, like some people, he had like 4 points, 5 boards, 2 assists. The high post stuff, it didn't really work offensively. It doesn't mean it won't work. They're gonna have to find their own counters. They have to keep working through this stuff, but it wasn't a home run by any means. And Darko also talked about how they're gonna try and run that stuff through Precious as well. Who knows how any of this stuff is gonna work? But the big point is their defense was so good that they got to push in transition, and they basically sleptwalked to 112 points, right? They had 18 assists on their 21 first made field goals. Why? Because like some of the handoffs are working really well, but mostly because their big wings are making really easy inherent reads in transition with live dribbles. That's the easiest place to get an assist is transition. I'll tell you that much. Most people who are listening to this, you've played basketball. You know what it looks like when the other team is tired and you guys are pushing. It's just like look one way, live dribble, push past the other way. Piece of cake. This is how the game is played. I was interested to see how often the Raptors could stay out of the half court, and man, they did a great job on it. I do want to talk about Grady Dick. We didn't get him for a while, and it's similar to Summer League. When I covered Summer League, I talked to Grady about this. Making the right reads, but not getting the outcomes. Grady is reading the game really quickly, really fast. He's rapid moving off the ball. Not in that he's the quickest guy on the floor, but he's thinking through the game so quickly that he's making decisions to beat the defense to spots. He made that JJ Redick floating in air fader, and he did it twice actually. He just got called for a double dribble the first time he did it, and I he got a steal too. He was doing a really good job on the weak side zone. This was a big deal coming out of Kansas, right? Grady has pretty slow feet. He's got those big old calves. He's kind of got slow feet. Teams will look to put him in space and attack him. That's like a certainty. Of course, it's going to happen. But the thing is, if you can keep Grady out of space, keep him in the team concept, and keep him as somebody who is, playing off ball defense, maintaining the zone on the weak side, and making teams try and win that game of like cat and mouse, he's making a lot of really great decisions. That was the thing that stood out first and foremost at Summer League was his defensive reads. That's not what a lot of people expected. They thought like he's the shooter, he's going to shoot. But there's a reason that after they drafted him, Bobby Webster said, "Hey, we had Grady in a class of his own. He's not like an off-ball player. He's not 3-and-D. He's a really special player because he reads the game so quickly. And since he draws a lot of closeouts, despite not hitting anything yet, he does a really good job of moving the ball, cutting into dangerous spots on the floor, can catch again and move the ball again. Like he's just reading the floor really quickly. And these things are popping up. These things are fantastic indicators. Once the shots go down at the percentages that most people expect, this stuff will become more and more important. I thought that Grady was awesome. I know it's like it's 2 points, it's 3 rebounds, it's 2 steals, and you know, is this anything to write home about? I don't know. But as far as the decisions he made on the floor, it's I think I'm really happy. Here's a question from a listener. Do I think Grady's ideal outcome is Duncan Robinson of last postseason shooting the ball and being able to attack closeouts effectively? I think that if Grady has like a stretch like Duncan Robinson has had a couple times, that'll be really good. I'm hoping he doesn't have the same lows that Duncan did, but Duncan is a super, super hard worker getting to his shots. Grady does a fantastic job in a similar vein. He's I think, a little bit smaller. And I think that we just have to see how his movement shooting in particular translates. But I think that Grady is a far more gifted passer than Duncan Robinson. When I was watching his Kansas State footage, a lot of what popped was that if he's in an empty side pick and roll, he does an awesome job, and I mean an awesome job, finding the roller. Can get wide, and it's like that. Everybody knows you're going left on an empty side pick and roll, and you pick up the ball, and it becomes that like over the top push pass with your right hand. That's how, or if you're really good with your left hand, you can do like that left-handed hook pass. Marquise Noel's actually his first assist ever with the Raptors at Summer League was that crazy hook pass with his left to Moses Brown. it depends, but Grady a lot of times is going over the top because of his height, and Noel is a guy who a lot of times will go with the hook pass because he has to keep it lower. And so you want the speed of the hook pass, creating the angle from the side in, and Grady wants to go over top. But basically what I'm saying is that Grady has is a really talented playmaker. He's really talented at reading the floor, and once his shot making catches up to his ability to read the floor, because his shot making, it should be good, but is as of yet unproven at the NBA level. I guess we'll see, but I just think he was awesome in this game. I know we want to see shots go in, but the proof of concept as far as like winning with defense, winning in transition, it was set in that 2021-22 season. The Raptors, yeah, and they also had offensive rebound a lot. Like they had to do it a ton. Winning this game without really leaning on the offensive rebounds and also being able to score at the back end of the shot clock more effectively by leaning on some of Scotty's playmaking more, Jakob's playmaking more, and just bludgeoning. Because the Raptors as a team last season, they didn't get to the paint that much. That sounds insane, I know, but because Pascal and Scotty, anytime they touch the ball, if they ISO, they can get a paint touch. But the Raptors, I believe, the league over were 25th in paint touches last season. Part of that is a Fred VanVleet led offense to some degree. He's not the pass he's making out of the pick and roll. He's going to make it before he gets to the paint, probably, because if he gets to the paint, then he's gotten too deep, and then the help defense is there, and he can't pass over it. Like that's tough. Schroeder, the playmaking this game, it was subtle. It wasn't these big plays that he was making. Scotty, as far as passing over the help side defense, that's not something he has to worry about. Same with Pascal. And it also helps that in this game, like Gary and OG just hit everything and did a fantastic job in the cat and mouse closeout situations. Like, okay, are you gonna chop your feet? Or are you coming hard? Like, is it a pump and go? Are you showing me the top foot and I'm gonna attack that? How are we processing how to get downhill? And Gary and OG, really high percentage of the times that they got those opportunities, they chose the right avenue. I know OG, like he shoots 6 of 7, Gary 7 of 12. It also helps that, McDaniels and Boucher both get into the double digits. That's awesome. McDaniels, really like a sick game from him. Hitting that first three, it was nice. The stroke looks smooth. I'm still waiting on it. I need to see it. He's had stretches, right, of really good shooting, and he's had stretches of not so great shooting. And with decent shot quality, both sides, he's been streaky. If he has a great shooting year this year, God, these Raptors deserve it because they've had guys underperforming their jumpers for quite some time. I'd love for a guy to come in and just completely blow it out of the water, right? But he's also very svelte on offense, slipping into space, working off of the other guys. Again, just preseason, but nice to see. And then on defense, like, yeah, he got lost on a couple picks, but he's very, very slithery for his size, and he has a bunch of length to help the Raptors as a collective shrink the floor. You could tell, like, the Kings in this game, they were seeing ghosts. That's a big deal. The Raptors' length was catching up to their actions so quickly that Alex Len, for example, or JaVale McGee catching the ball in the middle of the floor, they're looking to pass above the break or to the corner before they look and see that the rim is kind of open because they're expecting to be covered. They're expecting the length to have already caught up. McDaniels is very overrated on defense, though, bruh. I think like he had interesting flashes with the Hornets. I think he had interesting flashes with the 76ers as far as this past game. I'm not talking about McDaniels, how he's rated as defense. I think he had like an interesting defensive game where lots of positive things happen. And I think he benefits from the same thing that Boucher does, where if you're part of an active collective as a long, springy guy, the bad decisions you make can kind of be papered over by the defensive concept. And also, we're looking at a guy who the things you do really well are exacerbated. They're elevated in these types of schemes. This is also how Tobias Harris is like, a pretty poor defender at times. But since he's in a big, big Philadelphia defense, he can have really strong stretches where he's playing more like, okay, if I make a mistake here, it's fine because we're still a big unit. We're covering a lot of ground. Guys feel pretty adventurous sometimes. But yeah, that's all I mean to say. I'm glad anytime somebody pays attention to defense though. Not enough people do. So thanks for the insight. As far as from Jim Leahy, what do I think of Malachi's performance? I did like 3 or 4 minutes just on Malachi at the start of it. Since this does go out as like a podcast for people to listen to, and the podcast listeners like completely dwarf the live listeners, I do have to kind of fit in everything in a linear fashion mostly. That's kind of the interesting thing about doing this as not just a live show, but also as something that people will listen to before the night is over and on their walks tomorrow morning and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I thought it was good. Just to sum up the game right now, I think where's Trey? Trey is at home doing something else, I'm sure. But do I think Jeff will get any minutes soon? Jeff Delton, I guess we'll see. I really don't. I like Jeff's game. I think there's a spot in the NBA for Jeff, but I also think that it's really tough to make it in the NBA now as a guard. Like, it's really difficult. You have to do a lot of things really, really well. And that's all I'll say on Jeff right now. Do I still feel a below average offense is the ceiling? They were 12th last year. They had their third season in a row. They had the Tampa season, 2021-22, and last season, I think they were 21st or 20th, 25th, and 26th in half court offense. I've been talking in the podcasts about half court offense specifically. I think they're like a bottom third half court offense. I'm pretty sure that's gonna be the case, but who knows how often they get into transition? That is the stuff where it's more intangible. Is like, how are these guys conditioned? How are these guys pushing the pace? How good is the defense? And not only that, but like when we look at the Raptors, how many times do they get to play in their shell defensively because of how they score? There's a lot of variables as far as how the Raptors will perform on offense overall. Could they get into top half? Geez, I don't know. I'd be very impressed if they did because I think their defense I've been saying it for a while, but their defense could certainly be top 5. And if it's worse than top 10, I'm shocked. I'm shocked if their defense is worse than top 10. I think that would be man, I'd be super disappointed in the guys if they were worse than top 10 defensively. And if you get into the top half of offense and you're like, man, top 5, top 7 in defense, that's a really nice team. And I think that would be a massive win for the Raptors. If they can get into like transition enough to bump themselves into the top half of NBA offense, well done. I won't rule it out because I think there's a possibility for a lot of stuff, but I think you have to consider like the half court offense, you kind of know what that might look like. And I've seen a couple people express an opinion that they think the Raptors half court offense will be out of the bottom third. You're talking about anywhere from 19th to number 1. I'd be super impressed if they were able to do that. I think it would just be, man, I think it would be awesome if they were able to do that. But there's a lot of variables that we don't know. Like their half court offense in this game, I don't think was super, super effective. Of course, the same way their defense was really good in this game. It's just preseason. If they're not doing so well on offense, again, like it's just preseason. This kind of stuff is really hard to contextualize. That's why I'm talking more so about like the actual actions I'm seeing on the court as far as that stuff goes. Yeah, predicting the offense for this team is very, very difficult because they're coming out of 3 straight years where the half court offense has been very poor, where they haven't shot the 3 ball well, and those things correlate quite heavily. And they've been kind of navigating and finding their ways to offense by pushing pace. And as I talked about at the start of the podcast, the very start is like the Raptors did such a fantastic job of identifying the Kings' weakness, which is their wings. The Raptors' greatest strength is their wings, Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes, OG Anunoby, and guess what? Those guys are beating the bigs down the floor, or they're getting an early seal on a cross-matched small. The transition stuff was easy. The pseudo transition stuff was really easy. I think just the Raptors, like, I know it's just preseason, but the game plan was great. They played awesome on defense. They let Scotty lead them offensively. Pascal has been a great transition player for a long time, and particularly as far as like collapsing the defense and creating 3-point shots. But you know what Scotty's even better at than Pascal? Pushing the pace and creating layups. And I don't know the macro, what is a transition three, the average worth versus what is a transition layup, the average worth. But transition layups go in at such a high rate. I gotta feel like it's that. So Scotty driving the offense in that way, just like the ball is in his hands, he's pushing. You could see the difference, right, between Pascal and Scotty pushing in this game. We'll see. But yeah, it was great. From Jonathan, I assume that looks like Jonathan Chen's. He's a great writer at Raptors Republic, the best Canadian basketball writer. Notice Darko was going with a lot of high elbow actions with Siakam and OG in the corners. Do you like that alignment specifically with Siakam in the corner? So I think it's just so that they can have him come up and lift in case something doesn't really go great during the play, right? And Siakam has been a good 3-point shooter. If the first play, bam, it hits, sure, what the hell? And Siakam, he doesn't have a ton of gravity, but he has more than some of the wings. So I think like that's the thought process there. Because Siakam above the break doesn't have a ton of gravity as far as like off ball. He's a guy who you want the ball in his hands for the team to respond to him. But if he's in the corner, he can kind of drag a guy out of the paint. I think that's the case as far as that goes. Darko seems cool. Yeah, Darko is cool, man. I've liked my conversations with Darko so far. I think it's been great. Do I feel it's important for Darko to get buy-in early from players? Hell yeah. You just buy-in is very important, especially for the effort aspects of the game, right? Talent determines the high-end outcomes almost always. We haven't seen a plucky underdog team win a championship in forever. Everyone tried to say the Raptors were, but then as soon as that team broke up, every like piece of the top 8 rotation was like, I'm gonna go score 20 points per game, whether it's on the Raptors or elsewhere. And of course there was Kawhi. So yeah, the points per possession on average in transition is really good, but the twos and threes, I don't know it either. That's something Blake would probably know off his cuff. But yeah, something interesting. The rotation when healthy, I think that was asked of me. These are like big conversations for a 1-game recap, but I did talk about the game pretty well. I think we covered the big concepts. The turnovers, hey man, I'll get back to the rotation question right after this. I feel like ADHD going on here. The turnovers, 11 by the starters, it's going to be a little messy. They were trying to make a lot of those slick little interior passes. There's a lot of hands on the interior. They'll find their timing throughout the season, but also the more you pass, the more you're going to turn the ball over. That's why, because teams hate turnovers at the end of game, that's why teams run a lot of isolation and straight pick and roll at the end of games, because they'd rather miss a shot, get back and defend, and take the chance that their star is going to hit a contested jumper than they would ping the ball around, because they're like, if we're pinging that thing, we might find a layup, sure, but I mean, my God, we might turn it over. And as we said, transition points per possession is pretty high. The rotation question. I thought that Dennis wouldn't be starting. It looks like Dennis is going to be starting. I don't, and Gary, I mean, Gary came off the bench. He was awesome. Maybe I haven't talked about Gary enough, so thank you for bringing this up. Gary was so fantastic in this game. The playmaking obviously still needs a ton of steps. A lot of the reads he makes are really simplistic. He's not dragging the defense to a ton of really interesting places. But get this, he's got a lot of shooting gravity. He can get to his spots and he can hit shots. On this Raptors team that is pretty hard pressed for shooting, that is a really big deal. And not only that, he was really quick moving off the ball when something wasn't there. This is something that Gary, it was very important for him to do this, but also the team at large, this is something that they had to be able to do consistently. And Gary, I mean, for a guy who can sometimes, come off of a dribble handoff, the defense flattens out, he'll kind of like rock the baby, bam, bam, get into a combo, try and hit a step back 18-footer or something like that. What he does instead in this game, and hopefully during part of this season, he's moving the ball on, coming off another screen, using his gravity to try and open up the action that's the now primary. And he is floating to the corner above the break to support that action now as a shooter. This is how it's progressing. This is how he's being used. And that is a little bit more active, at least, than in the Nurse offense. That's the big difference, is that a lot of the primary actions, the first thing that the Raptors are running this season, or at least in this one preseason game, super, super similar to Nurse's offense. If anyone thinks I'm just pulling stuff out of my butt, if you're just getting used to my work now, I do the X's and O's breakdowns and like the play style breakdowns and scheme breakdowns of the Raptors. That's a big part of my coverage. A lot of this stuff was super similar, but the buy-in and the movement after the initial action is really what made the huge difference for the Raptors as far as play style in this game. Now, finally, the rotation. Yes, the starting five for tonight, let's say that's the rotation. That's the five. We're going to see that. Gary is your 6, obviously. I think Jalen McDaniels could slip in anywhere from 10 through 8. I think Precious could slip in anywhere from 9 through 7. And I think Boucher is in there somewhere as well. Who else am I missing, right? We could look at Malachi Flynn. I don't think he's going to play himself into a bunch of minutes. I'm not expecting it, but we'll see. By the looks of it, Grady is more so in like a prove it situation as he kind of gets used to the physicality that he's seeing on a lot of these screens. He's getting forced downhill on a lot of stuff. This also happened at Summer League. I'm not saying my preferential. I'm saying what I expected to be early. I think Grady is going to be like 10-9 early on and going to try and battle up the roster throughout the season. And if it's better than that, like great. I want a lot of Grady minutes. I think that's something really interesting. Marquise Noel, I think he's going to boss at the 905. I think that's just going to be like 100% what he's doing. He struggled with the size at the NBA a lot in this game. He also struggled with it a lot at Summer League. I talked to him a little bit about that when I was down there. Freeman Liberty, I think also like, I don't know if he's going to make it. I think it might just be like 905 stuff. Mohamedou, I think he's like a 905 guy too. And Garrett Temple, I guess we'll see. But it's interesting. Yeah, like Ron Harper Jr., probably 905 again. McCurr, I think probably 905 again. Doughton, he might be moving on. I guess we'll see. But man, it's tough to say. Thad, I know Thad like was in some of the highlights in this game, and they just by proxy of him being a more fluid passer out of those like high post actions than Chris Boucher is. He got a lot of touches. I still don't think that Thad is going to play a huge role on this team. He did play 15 minutes in this game, but we'll see. Who would I like best? I think my highest potential situation is like Grady, Gary, Precious, Boucher, and Koloko and McDaniels are swapping based on how the game is progressing. I think that's like who I think has the most potential and who is the most interesting through 10 guys. And then obviously you have your starting lineup, of course. Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at. But I've been talking for 50 minutes. There's like 260 people watching. That's awesome. I hope you guys continue to watch these over the course of the season. I cover the team. I'm down at the games for the home games, but I don't travel with the team on away games. So on away games, come to YouTube. I'll be talking and, respond to stuff and talk about the game that was. And I'm excited to talk with you guys all season. The home games and stuff, if you want to listen to my analysis, the best thing to do is after because I have to talk to the players after the game, talk to the coaches after the game, then come home and write a piece and record the podcast. The best way to listen to my thoughts is to, of course, just listen to the podcast when it comes out late that night, and or maybe the next morning. If you're interested in so much of me, and you definitely don't have to be. Thank you to everybody for listening. Listeners who are listening not on live, but my goodness, listening to 50 minutes of a post-game podcast. Good Lord, I have a hard time stopping talking to people who are like, asking questions. So the reaction podcast might be a lot longer this season by the looks of it. But thanks to everybody for listening. The live people, you're fantastic. The listeners afterwards, you're fantastic. Thanks for tuning into this. And whether you got into this in the morning or at night, have a blessed day and goodbye.